Well, I've done it again. This is what happens when you don't do an awful lot of planning. First I wanted 3 parts, then that expanded to 4, and now we're going up to 5 delicious Atari arcade videos. I can't imagine there's any complaining about this, but well, what am I like? Anyway, we're now in the 90s. We're going from 1990 all the way to 1995, where there's a split point that ultimately was the reason I decided to split this decade into 2, the Midway acquisition. While the 90s isn't usually known as a good period for Atari's arcade titles, particularly when compared to the likes of Capcom, Konami or Namco, and we will be seeing the odd clanger here and there, you may be surprised at the level of games they put out over the decade, whether they're good or bad. The first half of the 90s unfortunately does feature quite a few of the bad ones, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are some very worthy games indeed. There's both the released and the unreleased games, of which there are plenty, and of course there's some business to be getting on with. The shape of Atari games will change a couple of times throughout the decade, starting in 1994. For now though, we go to 1990, and we're going to get on with covering these various coin-ops. Please play the appropriate bong sound in your head as I ask you to insert an imaginary credit, and we get on with our first batch of titles. We start things off in January of 1990, and perhaps not with the game you would have expected us to kick things off with. Atari's first 90s game is actually BadLands. This was released purely as a conversion kit, and it's the third and final game in this newer Sprint series. The gameplay is much the same, but the aesthetic is now more post-apocalyptic, all abandoned factories and assorted wastes. One shame is that, unlike the previous Sprint titles, this isn't a medium resolution System 2 game, so the graphics aren't quite as crisp as they were before. As far as gameplay goes, you can also now shoot enemies in front of you, and there's even more hazards to be dealing with. On the whole, it's okay. More like a little twist on the regular Sprint gameplay than a major upheaval of it. The shooting only usually takes other cars a little off course as opposed to blowing them up, and the main aim is still very much dealing with the twists, turns and gates you will find in these single screen tracks. An okay twist, but I'd largely prefer to play the regular Super Sprint or Championship Sprint over BadLands, if I'm being honest. Right, all together now. It is the 90s, and it is time for Klax. You may have expected Klax to be the first game that Atari released in the 90s, and I certainly hoped it was, seeing as it would have been thematically appropriate. As it is, it comes out in February. Designed by Mark Pierce and originally knocked up by Dave Akers on an Amiga, before being converted for the arcade using the hardware from Escape from the Planet of the Robot Monsters, this is a puzzle game with a game show kind of vibe, one where you control a bucket, you grab tiles as they come down a belt, and you dump them in your well to make Klaxers, 3 or more tiles of the same colour, either vertical, horizontal or diagonal. You have a different aim in each wave, scoring points, making specific Klaxers, simply surviving a bunch of tiles, and the bucket can hold on to a few tiles at once, even temporarily kicking tiles back up the belt if it's full. Good job you can do these things really, as you don't get a lot of space in that well. Klax works pretty well as an arcade puzzle game, as it's not long before things get utterly manic. Really, you need to try and get through waves as quick as you can, as it's not long before the rate of tiles ups to a level that you simply can't deal with, and only a couple need to drop into the abyss before you fail a wave and have to continue. Mechanics wise, it's pretty damn good. One quibble I do have with it, and this was mainly fixed in home versions of the game, is that I wish there was a little bit more differentiation between the various tiles. I am a little bit colourblind, which doesn't help, but when you've got mainly red, orange, green and brown tiles to contend with, yeah, that can be a bit of a pain. That's a personal nitpick, perhaps. This is still damn good, and it was a decent-sized hit as a conversion kit, shifting nearly 6,000 units and getting a lot of home conversions. Amusingly, one of these conversions, the later Game Boy Color one, features a quite detailed hidden real history of the game, written by Akers. Some of the detail in this entry comes from that very Easter egg. I'd say that June 1990's Hydra is the first of a few Atari arcade games in this video that don't really get talked about at all nowadays, and one that does perhaps deserve a little more love. I consider Hydra to be a spiritual sequel to Road Blasters, only now you're playing as a top-level courier who has to do things like scoot the crown jewels back to where they belong, and you do so on rivers and rapids as opposed to the road. You blast the various ships in front of you, getting a better multiplier if you're playing decently. You've got a boost in the shape of a jump that allows you to leap right up into the air and collect bonuses that are on balloons. You've got to grab the precious item back from an enemy ship if you crash, and all the while there's a fuel meter that's ticking down. You can get extra fuel during the stage, but really the only way you're going to make it through to the end of a level is by not crashing loads and otherwise screwing up. If you have to continue, you're going to replay the stage again. If you watched the last video, you'll know just how much I dig Road Blasters, and unsurprisingly I dig this one a lot too. The same sort of fun and intense action, but with a bunch of neat little extras and better graphics. Yeah, Hydra's right up my street. Or canal, I guess. This didn't do particularly well. Less than 1,000 kits, I believe, but it's well worth firing up in MAME. Another great game from Dennis Harper. By this stage, just as with a lot of other arcade game developers, a chunk of Atari's arcade games are purely being sold as conversion kits, with dedicated cabinets being reserved for more major efforts. That is, after all, a cheaper deal for everyone involved when it comes to both manufacturing and buying, and it's all utterly doable since Jammer became the arcade standard back in the mid-late 80s. Rusty Door's ThunderJaws is a rather typical sort of conversion kit arcade game, not exactly a major entry into the Atari Games canon, and on playing it it's kind of easy to see why. The initial aesthetic is kind of fun, with it being a slightly more comedic take on the classic super spy James Bond sort of thing. And of course the first stage where you're underwater, making your way to Madame Q's base, avoiding sharks and shooting enemy goons with harpoons is pure Thunderball, as the name of the coin-op obviously alludes to. When you get into an enemy base, that's where things get a bit meh. The bulk of ThunderJaws is a dual-level walk-and-shoot game. Atari had a decent success when they published Namco's Rollin' Thunder in the States, and this is essentially their take on that game. Graphically it's nice, but the movement is just a bit too clunky and, in the end, you just end up wanting to play Rollin' Thunder instead. It's a bit like Skull and Crossbones really. The personality's there, but the play's just not quite making it on this one. Again, much like that game, it is the sort of thing you may have nostalgia for if you played it back in the day. Unfortunately, I didn't, and so I don't. Speaking of games that you may well have a lot of nostalgia for, this is an absolute biggie in that department, and it's Atari's biggest arcade release of the year. It's August of 1990, and it's time for the ultimate competition. Pit Fighter. Can you take kickboxer Ty, pro wrestler Buzz, or karate man Kato to the top in this ultra underground illegal Sigma Ultimate Tough Man tournament? It's going to be slow, deep and hard as you fight your way through a rogues gallery of absolute sausages. Dock workers, bikers, gimps, dominatrixes, leather daddies, people dressed in nothing but chains and a thong, people who look like they're wearing a skunk on their head, people who are clearly just one of the bloody programmers and so on before you get to the almighty masked warrior and knock him out to prove that you're harder than him and everyone else. You can even take a power pill in order to literally increase in size, becoming spectacularly engorged and able to outlast even the hardest of men. Okay, that's enough pillow talk for now. Pit Fighter is a fighting game that's entirely made out of digitised sprites, captured in front of the old blue screen. It's not the first digitised fighting game, as that honour belongs to the exceptionally strange Chinese Exorcist, nor is it the first game that's basically entirely made out of digitised sprites. That honour belongs to Exterminator. Still, it's a pretty key title in the development of digitised sprites, especially seeing as it was a decent hit. There were 5,500 cabs, pretty good seeing as Pit Fighter was initially only sold as a dedicated cabinet. The main team behind the game featured designers Gary Stark and Mark Pierce, as well as artist Rob Rowe, who was in charge of the digitising. He'd previously worked on Blastoids, while Dave Tura was also involved in the production. All came together to create the game. Not just the programming and graphics of course, but also finding appropriately fit and muscular people to play the various parts. Well, muscular aside from Mad Miles anyway. Several of the development team, including Rowe and cabinet genius Milt Loper, make cameos as part of the crowd, and just as with Mortal Kombat later on, rumours spread that Jean-Claude Van Damme was a part of the Pit Fighter cast. Now, of course, this wasn't true, but at least one member of the Pit Fighter cast has gone on to become quite famous, actress Kim Rhodes, whose voice was used for Heavy Metal, the aforementioned skunk hat-wearing dude. According to Rowe, in a making-of feature by David Craddock for Cool Stuff, the digitisation process for something like Pit Fighter is certainly a bit cruder than what came later. It involved setting actors in front of a blue screen, recording them, and then grabbing key frames from their full move, one in a script to grab every third frame or so. This process is certainly an aged one compared to the motion capture that comes in later, although it's kind of part of the charm of games like Pit Fighter, or Mortal Kombat for that matter. They have a certain uncanny valley feel about them in the animation department, which I like. Pit Fighter plays out in a similar fashion to the likes of Taito's Violence Fight and SNK's Street Smart, both of which were released in the previous year. You have a big arena to move around in, and an opponent to do battle with, or sometimes two, and up to 3 players can play. Most of these arenas, whether they be dive bars, a vacant lot or whatever, do feature a bunch of weapons that you can use, which the other 2 games didn't really have. There's 2x4s, knives, shurikens, barrels, grates, bikes, a bunch of things to either swing or throw at your enemy. And yes, there is the aforementioned power pill, which you usually find in a broken barrel or crate and acts as a whopping great buff, making you close to invincible for a short time. The crowd is also quite active. They'll push you back in, they'll accidentally get hit themselves, and one cheeky bastard may even poke a dagger out. That's a very cool touch really. I love the Pit Fighter crowd. You try to defeat the other guy in as quick a time as possible, and your exploits are celebrated as you stand on a forklift and a big pile of money forms under you, all while the game says that what you just did was totally studly, or awesomely done. Every couple of matches, you get a little bonus round, the grudge match, which happens against your twin. You've simply got to knock them down 3 times using your various moves, which include punches, kicks, stomps, throws and so forth, as well as individual specials. The 3 characters have certain strengths. Kato is the speedy one, but speed doesn't matter a whole lot here honestly. He's the hard option. Buzz is the strong one, he's got quite a few throws kicking around that can do damage. He's medium. And Tai? Tai is freaking broken. He's fast and tough, his strikes have the best range and can keep most of the other fighters at a distance, and you can throw them as fast as you can hammer a button. So yeah, you will probably want to play as Tai. Now, to be straight, Pit Fighter is not a good game. It's hardly a balanced arcade fighter, and most would say it's aged about as well as a half-eaten burger. But while they would perhaps be right about the aging, I still have a huge soft spot for this one. Again, I grew up with this as one of my first arcade experiences. Pit Fighter was all over the shop, and I thought it was awesome, a game that I played any time I saw it. Like the cheesiest possible martial arts movie only in game form, something that could have easily had Michael Dudikoff, Brian Bosworth and Jean-Claude Van Damme playing the 3 main characters, with an appropriate rogues gallery and some pretty cool rockin' music. In the days before Street Fighter 2, Pit Fighter was in many ways the champion. It was a popular arcade indeed. Was it a popular arcade after Street Fighter 2 arrived? After Mortal Kombat arrived? No, perhaps not. Definitely not. But it still lingered. Hell, Mortal Kombat owes a debt to it. Broken and cheesy though it may be, I still kind of love this game. I don't love its many home conversions though, because holy shit they are the worst. Seriously, perhaps the worst conversions ever, especially the SNES. August's Race Drivin is, of course, the sequel to Hard Drivin, or perhaps more accurately an update, released both as a dedicated cab and conversion kit, and still including the originals track alongside two new ones, a short autocross track that's kind of for beginners, and a new super stunt track. Also, there is a link-up feature which would allow two cabs to be connected together for head-to-head racing, and you have 3 different cars to choose from this time. Other than that, it's more of the same. The graphics haven't improved all that much, and the driving is very much of the simulator variety still. It's okay, I guess. I find this to be a significantly lesser title than the original, simply because the 2 new tracks aren't really as memorable as the original circuit. The new corkscrew loop is kind of cool, but one thing that really brings them down, to be honest, is that there's no other cars on the road. I mean, especially on the autocross track, what's even the point of that one if there's no cars to avoid or race against, unless you're playing with someone else in a rare link-up example? It feels kind of devoid of life as a result, and seeing as the best thing about race driving is that it still includes the original circuit, there's not an awful lot of point playing it over the original. The 16-bit home conversions of the game did add a track editor, at least, which is kind of a cool feature, although obviously you have to contend with significantly lesser performance there. It's also worth noting that there is a very deluxe and probably extremely rare version of this game, 1991's Race Driving Panorama, which can use up to 5 monitors for a 180-degree view of the action. Yeah, that's pretty big. I suppose that what you have there is a more game-friendly version of the setup that you would find in the mobile operations simulator machines that were sold by AGC, which we'll be talking about in a couple of entries' time. Our last released game for 1990 is October's Shuuz, one that got a very limited release indeed, to the point where it's kind of debatable as to whether it's an official release or if it just got a bit of location testing. This is a game all about throwing horseshoes, weirdly coming out in the same year as the only other horseshoe arcade game I can think of, Taito's American Horseshoes. Thus, these 2 games are now locked in an eternal battle for supremacy to see which is the king of the ringers. You pick a character, you're talked at by a Timu Mr. Ed who's hosting the proceedings, and then you get to throw in using a trackball. You get 2 horseshoes a turn, you get 1 or 2 points depending on if you get one or both closer to the stake, and you get 3 points for a ringer, getting the shoe inside the stake, basically. The first to 21 points wins. Horseshoes is a pretty novel thing to see in an arcade game, something that I guess was having a bit of a moment at the start of the 90s, and I kind of wish I could give a fair appraisal of the title, but try as I might, I just couldn't find a good way to emulate the trackball controls here. I tried to get the mouse on it, but either I threw the shoe way too far, or it came up way too short. Either way, I got my butt well and truly whooped by the computer. Of course, this isn't the game's fault at all. I would like to be able to say more, but the control has eluded me on this one. I guess I'll stick to getting my horseshoe fix in Red Dead Redemption for now.
Player 2 scores 1 point. To me, baby.
Here we have the AGC Mobile Operations Simulator, or AMOS, from around 1990. This sim isn't dumped, but we can see it here in a promotional video, and it's a version of hard driving, or perhaps more accurately race driving, that's designed to simulate driving a cop car around a city, complete with a panoramic cabinet. The panoramic cab was also used commercially for special versions of race driving, although that only has 3 monitors. This police trainer has 5 of the fins. There's more here than just driving as well. It links up to monitors that review performance, and even a laserdisc shooting game. Pretty serious hardware, and it all makes for something that's very different to the original racing title. This isn't unreleased as such, and it was available for years, but of course it was only available to cop shops and never commercially. I thought I should mention it.
Into dangerous emergency response driving situations where they are required to make split-second decisions. There is no other way to safely train officers in these dangerous situations.
The quality of Atari's arcade games can be a little variable in the 90s, but they're most certainly capable of producing some damn good ones. 1991's going to see 3 goodies, and the first of these is Rampart, which while dated 1990 actually got its wide release in February of 91, shifting around 1,000 units and 1,800 kits. Rampart is another game by the dynamic duo of Dave Ralston and John Sulwitz, and it takes on an interesting challenge to make an arcade game out of strategy, one of the genres you would think would be least suited to the arcades, and somehow it manages to pull it off. You start by picking a place for your fort, you place the initial cannons and fire them at the enemy ships, who naturally fire right back. All of these phases only ever last 10 to 20 seconds or so, and once the cannon phase is done, you have to rebuild your fort using tetrominos, first making sure you patch up any holes, and then perhaps making it a bit bigger with anything you have left. If you can get walls around more castles, you get more cannons. You lose if you can't repair your castle in time, and you win after you sink enough of the ships. It's a nice bit of tower defence, memorable enough even if the graphics are somewhat basic thanks to some handy sounds and voice samples, and while it's a good laugh in single player, it's something that really shines in multiplayer where you're both constructing a fort and trying to blast out the enemy's fortifications. A damn fine game, really. Much like Klax, the rather simple nature of the presentation meant that it was a nice thing to have in the home as well. Good stuff.
Ready! Aim! Fire!
There are many Batman games based on the 1989 movie, it must be said. Not exactly a surprise, seeing as it was such a frickin' juggernaut when it came to merchandise. There's the highs of the NES and Mega Drive platformers, the weirdness of the PC Engine top-down puzzler, the nostalgia of Ocean's licensed micro-effort. It is all quite broad, but I am afraid to say that the low point is Atari's arcade Batman, coming out in April 91 purely as a conversion kit and designed by Kelly Turner with Norm Avalar also programming. It's not completely terrible by any stretch, but it is definitely one of this video's weaker games. In the main, it's a quite standard side-scroller, packed out with a couple of shooty Batmobile stages, making it kinda close in spirit to the Ocean game, I suppose, although I much prefer that one. Much like ThunderJaws, the play is similar to that of Rolling Thunder in that it's a walk and shoot sort of a game, or at least it is once you pick up something like the Batarang or gas grenades. The Caped Crusader can at least use his fists and feet if he doesn't have those to hand. There's a lot of nice and clear speech samples from the movie, which is nice, but in 1991 what we have here does feel kind of dated. It's not just that there's Rolling Thunder to contend with after all. I wouldn't pick this one up over something like Shinobi or E-SWAT or Sly Spy, or various other rather similar titles that came out before this one, even if it does feature the Bat. I'm afraid that chances are you would rather dance with the devil in the pale moonlight than thrash in the arcade with this rather dull shite.
Well, it's time to retire.
Road Riot 4WD is a driving game, and you best get your seatbelt on. We will be seeing quite a few of these as we make our way through the decade. Hailing from June 1991, this is all about off-road driving. Get in a dune buggy and take on various circuits, using missiles to take out your opponents. This had a little bit of notoriety around the time, shifting 1,200 dedicated units, and I wish I could revisit it here. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, I simply cannot get the controls to work properly on this game. I'm not sure why, but nothing that I put in will actually make the buggy turn. Amusingly, I did manage to get through a couple of laps of the first circuit despite not being able to turn at all, but hey ho. Sometimes you can run into a bit of trouble here and there when it comes to old arcade games and the emulation thereof. As such, I can't really say if the game's good or not. It's certainly got the early 90s look down pat, if nothing else. We're hitting 3D again, and it's something different from a driving game. From August, we've got Steel Talons, a game designed by the two legendary Eds, Log and Rotberg, this being the final game that Ed Rotberg worked on before he jumped to Apple. This is all about air combat. You pilot the AT-1196 chopper and you go through several missions, with the goal being to take out all the targets in the zone, everything from buildings and tanks to rival helicopters. According to Log in Game Design Theory and Practice, the initial idea from the bigwigs was to create a 3D air combat game that involved jets, which clashed with his own idea to make a World War I game featuring biplanes. And so, they met in the middle with the attack helicopter. It is quite a beastly game for the time, working on hardware that's a bit more enhanced from that which powered hard driving, and despite the usual issue of the flat shaded polygons not aging well and the slightly slow speed nowadays, this does work out very well once you've got the controls sorted out. It certainly works a lot better than, say, Microprose's attempts to make arcade games out of their computer combat flight sims. The key here being that Steel Talons does have arcade sensibilities, not screwing around and quickly bringing you straight into the action. And once you're calibrated, flying the chopper's pretty easy to grasp. I mean, it may look at times as though I'm spinning around hopelessly, and I am, but that's more how I've configured my controls as opposed to an issue with the game itself. Also, the control can be changed on the fly. If you need a bit more precision and you feel like enough of an ace, you can switch to the real heli mode, which disables most of the computer assists. Good luck. The cabinet also deserves a specific mention, as it's another goodie, one that features force feedback in the shape of a rump thumper, a pinball thumper located under the seat that goes off whenever an enemy hits you. According to Log, this was initially really powerful, capable of jolting a spine, and it would drown out everything in the arcade. Ban, ban, ban! So they turned the voltage down a touch. On the whole, this arcade has held up quite well. On the other hand, attempts to port this game to the Mega Drive and SNES were a teensy bit overambitious, to say the least. Even the Lynx did a better job considering the hardware. Here's a really damn good game from 1991 that you may not be aware of, October's Off the Wall. While block breaking games were pretty damn common at this point, following the success of Arkanoid, Atari have a bit of a twist on the concept here that reaches a bit back into the company's history, in that it's a bit of a take on the Warlords formula, where you're the one attacking the fort, I suppose. The blocks are covering up the exit, and rather than simply taking out all the blocks, you've just got to get to that exit. Just as in Arkanoid, you have a few power-ups as well, from multi-balls to sticky paddles and so on. This whole thing is the brainchild of Kelly Turner, who led the project, with his usual partner in crime Norm Avalar programming with him. I must say, I like this style, and I might even prefer it to the regular Arkanoid form. Not having to break all the blocks certainly makes it play quicker, getting rid of what often ends up happening in Arkanoid. You have one or two blocks left that you're desperately trying to take out, and the game becomes frustrating at that point more than anything. The graphics are obviously quite simple, but Off the Wall does also come with some really damn good music, some of the best that I've heard in an Atari game for quite some time in fact. In short, this is definitely one that I would recommend highly, especially if you do like a good old block breaker. Even if you're not a huge fan of the genre, you may find that this game's take on it is a bit more enjoyable than the norm. Definitely go play this if you haven't. We're staying in 3D land for the next title, another one that we can't play, BMX Heat. Early on, this game was also known as Cyclotron, and it's a 3D racing game using the hard driving hardware and, of course, bikes instead of cars. A couple of pics of a prototype cabinet do exist, but we don't have anything in the way of screenshots. As can be seen, you would have controlled the game by sitting on a bike, pedalling and moving the handlebars. There's an AtariGames.com video out there too, from very early on, but unfortunately that's about all we've got for this title. Next, we have one of the most famous unreleased Atari games of them all. From 1991, here's the sequel to Marble Madness. Marble Madness 2, also known as Marble Man, came 7 years after the release of Mark Cerny's classic, and the primary goal was to fix the main issue people had with that original. It's great, but there's only 6 short levels. The sequel does add plenty more. There are now 17 levels, a bunch of power-ups, and now as many as 3 players can roll their balls about on the cabinet at once. This is good, but unfortunately the changes didn't stop here. The game was made a lot more cartoony as opposed to the abstract original. Not only does the ball have a face, but there are also cutscenes in which he changes to a humanoid and spouts cheesy one-liners. Focus groups utterly hated this, and the cutscenes were scrapped in later revisions. They also hated the controls. Marble Man did away with the trackball, opting for a joystick and accelerator button. In a 2020 interview with Antstream, designer Bob Flanagan said he thought that more people were now used to controlling console versions of the game in this manner, and that's why the change was made. But again, focus groups and particularly seasoned players of the original disliked the change immensely, preferring the original trackball. A lot of these changes were in service of making the game appeal to a more younger audience, but eventually the game was a victim to sea changes in the arcade world. With fighting games now ruling the roost, Atari thought it best to concentrate their time on Guardians of the Hood, and Marble Madness 2 was scrapped. For years the game was talked about with the hope that it would eventually see a wider audience, that those dreaded collectors would put it out there despite the old agreements they'd have made with old Atari to not release the ROMs, or the prices they were rumoured to be floating around to do it, even if most everyone knew it wasn't that good. For a long time it was only playable in a couple of locations, such as the California Extreme Expo, home of several other unreleased Atari arcades. And then, on May 21st, 2022, well, it just showed up. Someone named Dank2079 dumped the ROM and uploaded it onto the Internet Archive, and not long after that it was playable on MAME. So now everyone can play it and have their curiosity satisfied, even if the end results are kind of disappointing. Right, we're on to 1992. Honestly, this may be the weakest year of the whole video, at least when it comes to released games. There's 4 released ones, and unfortunately I'm not a huge fan of any of them. We start in April with Relief Picture. If you watched the last part, you'll have seen the original System 1 Relief Picture from 1986, the one that didn't get released but actually had a pretty cool twist on the regular baseball formula. While this mode does still exist in the game that got released in 1992, generally speaking this is more of a traditional baseball game. You pitch, you bat, a game takes ages, and you have to pump a load of coins into it if you're actually dedicated enough to get to the end. Is it a bad baseball game? Not really, but I have seen so many of these, and unless they're of the absolute highest quality, if they're baseball stars or something along those lines, I really am not in the slightest bit interested. I totally get why these games exist, and I'm sure they're a good thing to have at various baseball-enjoying locations, whether it be a bar or even at a stadium itself, but baseball arcade games are not my thing at all.
And he brings it home. Here's the throw.
Right, hopefully you're ready for a big dose of cringy digitised action. It's June of 1992, and it's time for Guardians of the Hood. This is a spiritual sequel of sorts to Pit Fighter, although none of the original's characters make an appearance. Instead we have Connor, Chief, Javier and Tanya all out to defeat gangs like the Dreads, Shavers and Dragons, convincing their heads to join up with you and rid the streets forever of the evil Mr. Big, who as it happens is revealed to actually be Miss Big if you somehow manage to get through the whole of this awful game. Basically it's a beat-em-up inspired by the real-life Guardian Angels, and it plays similarly to Pit Fighter. It all sounds like it's going to be a load of cheesy fun, but unfortunately this game is just horrendous. Pit Fighter has its merits, awkward though it may be as a one-on-one fighting game, but as a beat 'em up, it's so freaking slow and clunky. Just beating the most basic enemy takes forever, the game sucks coins up like a Henry Hoover, and it's not like there's even much to laugh at. Sure, the odd goon may pick up some poor civvy every once in a while and throw them at you, but that's not enough of a giggle to justify pumping in yet more credits. You do get one-on-one fights as well, of course, with the aforementioned Gans heads as well as friendly matches with your buddies at the gym, and these are all just Pit Fighter but without any of the laughs, and again, they take too frickin' long. Alas, this game just stinks. There's little redeemable about it, and if you want to plonk it into some context, well, Mortal Kombat hit the arcade floor a mere 2 months after this game. Enough said, really. The Guardians quite quickly fade into history, with this game never getting a conversion out of the arcade. Although they would have appeared in a Mega Drive and Mega CD sequel to Pit Fighter that was due for release in 1993, joining up with Tai, Buzz and Kato to get into the ultimate competition. This sequel was ultimately cancelled, although a working prototype was released a few months ago at Hidden Palace Zone. We're off to the track once again, this time for July's Moto Frenzy. Naturally, we're on a bike this time, and this is a motocross game, one that in many ways is quite similar to Road Riot 4WD. You don't have the weapons, but you do have the digitised vehicles, and happily, I can play this one. You jump about all over the place, you avoid a whole load of obstacles on each track, whether they be trees, other cars, polar bears, all depends on where you are, and try not to knock over any of the people watching. I mean, it doesn't actually matter if you do plough into them, but just try not to, okay? This is fine, I suppose. It's not an offensive game, but there's not too much to say about it, and considering that we're going to see several much better racing games from Atari in a few years as we make our way through, this isn't really a title I'd bother to boot up all that much. The fact that it's Atari's best released title from 1992 really says a lot about the crumminess of this year for them, really, especially seeing as 1992 is right in the middle of the arcades being massively popular again. One neat cabinet variation here is the Mini Deluxe. While it is often the norm to link up big environmental cabinets like this now, the Mini Deluxe Moto Frenzy actually has 2 bikes connected to it, which is a bit more economical. And unfortunately, October's Space Lords is another really quite poor and unmemorable game, one that I would have to say is a rare miss from Ed Log. This is a first-person space combat title where you fly quite slowly around an arena, switching between your front and rear view, and you have to take out a set number of enemy ships in each mission. There's asteroids that you have to avoid, this is an Ed Log game, nebulae that you can hide in, as well as missiles and hyperspace that you can use in a pinch. This may well be a game that shines better in cooperative 2-player, in which one mans the control and a co-pilot takes care of the guns, but it just doesn't really get going as a single-player title. It features a few elements from other games of course, particularly Log's own Asteroids, although it actually reminds me mostly of the absolutely ancient Starship 1, a title that's 15 years older than Space Lords, and honestly, is actually more fun to play. This is just too bloody slow for my taste, the sort of space game where you feel like you aren't moving anywhere. Atari games can get a little bit of a bad rap for their 90s games. While I do think that's unfair, as we will see from some of the great titles we're going to get, especially in the next video, their 1992 quartet really doesn't help matters here. Guardians of the Hood bears most of the blame for that, but Space Lords isn't much cop either, unfortunately. Ed Log's own retrospective thoughts on the game were that players thought that being the gunner, while it actually cost half the price of being the pilot, wasn't very fun, and that in a lot of places it just couldn't get anywhere. It could barely get in the door, outstripped by the wave of fighting games. Operators were more interested in those conversion kit games than they were a dedicated machine like Space Lords. Aside from a couple of years break to work at EA, Ed Logg stayed with Atari Games until the bitter end. However, Space Lords is his final released coin-op. Later he will handle the N64 ports of some games we'll be seeing in the final video, such as Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey and San Francisco Rush. And do you know what else is darkly amusing? We have 3 unreleased games available to us from 1992. We can play all 3, and guess what? All 3 are better than the titles that Atari actually put out. I do believe that by this point Atari were getting a bit cagey when it came to the games that they chose to make it out of location testing, not wanting to waste much needed money on a lame duck that would just get slaughtered by the big SF2 type juggernauts. Unfortunately, it feels like they made several errors in judgment in 1992. We don't know whether this upcoming trio would have been hits or not, but they are certainly better games than the released ones. From around 1987 onwards, Atari made the odd attempt at revisiting some of their older classics. Blasteroids is one example, being a decent if hardly superior sequel to Asteroids, and Vindicators is another. In many ways that's a follow-up to Battlezone with similar controls. Here in 1992 we have something more direct. Arcade Classics, a cabinet which consists of not one but 2 sequels that would have commemorated the 20th anniversary of the company's formation. We've got Super Centipede and Missile Command 2, the latter being very different to the original, also unreleased Missile Command 2 from 1981. Now, I say sequels, the gameplay isn't much different to the originals, but the graphics are enhanced. Technically, anyway. As much as the gameplay's still there, the graphics certainly don't have the timeless appearance of the original classics. They just look like games from 1992. There is a more new stuff dip switch that you can flick, although that only adds a couple of extra enemy ships to Missile Command 2. Centipede is frankly diminished by having a generic grass texture spread all over it, and while Missile Command 2 fares better, retaining the Earth setting, although it names the cities this time, something that Dave Tua originally decided against doing, is hardly going to replace the original. Mind you, there's no shame in that. It does at least keep the big "The End" screen. While this arcade version didn't make it, Arcade Classics games would eventually come out in the home in 1996 for Mega Drive, SNES and the like, where Ultrapon would also be added to the mix. I must say, this arcade game is, at the very least, a hell of a lot better than those ghastly console titles. We even have a cheesy as hell digitised game that, while not exactly good in any way, is certainly a lot better than Guardians of the Hood, and is definitely more entertaining in the cringe department. Say hello to Danger Express. You play as 2 bandanaed up badasses, and you have to stop the evil Dr. Ernst Blowfish from carrying out his evil nuke-based plan for world domination, and it's every bit as cheesy as it sounds. The actual game is kind of a hybrid between beat 'em up and shoot 'em up where you travel into the screen. It's probably best described as a really bad version of Konami's G.I. Joe, although there's a lot more close-up action here, along with plenty of cheesy voices and hilarious digitised costumes. There's not much good to say. The controls are stripped down from the likes of Pit Fighter and Guardians, so there's not a lot of variety, although the game certainly needs more work. But of course, as with many others, it did go out on a location test, and then shortly after, it disappeared never to be seen or spoken of again. Danger Express certainly does fit handsomely into the so bad it's funny category though, and I would recommend giving it a look just to, well, experience it, and be amused for 10 minutes, crap though it may be. Dr. Sparkz Lab is a slightly crude but actually quite entertaining little puzzle game from the ever-dependable duo of Kelly Turner and Norm Avalar, where you have a monster to reanimate with the power of electricity. The gameplay is kind of a cross between Pipe Dream and Tetris. You connect the pipes from the red side to the blue side of the well, but they don't have to be in a straight line and you get more points for bigger circuits. You can also use special arrow blocks to blow up loose connections, although you do want to be a little careful that you don't blow up the whole circuit that you're working on. This is quite a likeable little puzzler that once again didn't succeed in the location testing, apparently because players found the concept too difficult to get their heads around. It's kind of a shame really, as I would definitely recommend this one. According to the late Kelly Turner, only 2 or 3 PCBs of this game even exist, so we're probably quite lucky to have the game available for us on MAME. A quick note about Kelly Turner. Arcade Classics and Dr. Sparkz Lab were the last 2 coin-ops that he worked on for Atari, and he left in 1994, spending time variously at PF Magic and Virgin. In later years, Kelly Turner was a part of Atari panels at the California Extreme Expo in 2003 and 2004, but sadly he passed away after a short illness on September 18, 2005, at the age of just 43 years old. An incredibly premature and pretty sad loss. "1993 is an odd year where, well, we have no released arcade games at all, at least no released ones that Atari made. The arcades lie empty when it comes to new Atari games. Still, it doesn't mean that no work was being done. We do have a bunch more unreleased titles to look at. And then I suppose after that we should look at the business side of things to see what on earth's going on. Here's another weird little game. Beathead. This game is best described as a competitive take on Q*bert, where you have to land on the tiles that match your colour and stop the other guy from doing the same, and the presentation is early 90s as all hell. It's meant to look like some sort of hip music video or visualisation, with appropriate tunage in the background. The idea itself is very cool, although it still needs a lot of work in this prototype. Generally it's just a bit too easy, and it repeats itself before too long. Again, the field tests didn't work out. Michael Albor worked as a programmer on it and thought it should have been produced, but Atari's reticence killed it. In a 2021 LifeWire interview, he said that one of the issues with Atari at the time was that they often wouldn't release something to the floor unless they thought it was an absolute surefire thing, a guaranteed hit, and this put paid to a lot of the weirder titles like Beathead. It has been said of a few unreleased Atari games, even ones like Dr. Sparkz Lab, that Atari didn't release them because they didn't think they could compete with Street Fighter 2. Seems silly, but there you go. The company was simply very cagey around this time. I said a couple of entries ago that a lot of Atari games were cancelled because the bosses didn't think they could compete with Street Fighter 2, and here's a more direct attempt at trying to take on Capcom. Cyberstorm, a cancelled fighting game from 1993, is a pretty ban-average affair in which several robots go at it. It's not as cheesy, crude and flat-out terrible as something like Time Killers is, but there's not an awful lot to shout about here, and you can see why it didn't really get anywhere. This is but the first of several Atari fighting game efforts that didn't make it, and we'll be seeing a couple more. This proto is a relatively recent addition to MAME, not becoming available until the beginning of 2018. It appears that it was acquired by the MAME community through donations to the Japanese arcade collector Showtime, a name that's been mentioned several times whenever we've covered unreleased arcade titles, as he's been responsible for quite a lot of prototypes getting out there. We do have a bunch more info for the next 2 3D titles, both of which are games from the Drivin series that never came out. First up, here's Street Drivin from 1993. We can actually play this title in MAME, and it's pretty much complete, it just never ended up getting out there. Street Drivin carries on with the same classic formula, but with more added on. There are now 4 tracks to choose from, the original track and Super Stunt track now joined by autocross and stock car circuits. There's 4 cars too. The original Sportster is now accompanied by a Roadster, Speedster and Police car, all with their own difficulties. From there, the game is more of the same. You'll certainly dig it if you like hard and race driving, but it's not going to change your mind if you don't. Unfortunately, this didn't enter full production, and neither did another game in the series that was set for 1993, Hard Drivin's Airborne. Again, we've got different tracks and cars to play around with, and as the title suggests, you can now fly. You can gun it down those air ramps and take to the skies. It's far from perfect, but it's pretty cool. This game is also playable in MAME, but a few cabs actually were produced for Airborne, and they do look very nifty indeed. They certainly fit in with all the other cool cabinets that were made for games in the Drivin series. Still, now that we're in 1993, it's perhaps understandable why neither of these games went into full production. Unfortunately, they do look rather pedestrian when compared with contemporaries. After all, Ridge Racer came out this year. The Drivin games couldn't really compete with a game like that with its highfalutin textures and speed and what have you. And they're not exactly cheap alternatives, especially when you consider those cabs. But they're still cool artifacts, and I'm certainly jealous of any of the lucky few who have one of those Airborne machines. While Atari didn't fully release any arcade games by themselves in 1993, they did publish a couple this year, and so this is perhaps a good time to look at the games they published during the 1990 to 95 period. Atari did get a bit out of the second big wave of Laserdisc games, probably more than they got out of the first wave. They first worked with American Laser Games in 1990, publishing their big hit that really started this second burst of Laserdisc goodness, that being Mad Dog McCree in Europe. While Atari certainly wouldn't be the only company that ALG worked with, they did enter an exclusivity agreement with Atari in 1993, at least as far as Europe goes. And so, a bunch of their other games, including the likes of Crime Patrol and Last Bounty Hunter, were also published by Atari in that territory. Speaking of Europe, Atari also started publishing games from one of the continent's biggest arcade creators, that being Galco from Spain. While this partnership will reap considerably more rewards later in the 90s, 1993 sees them publish World Rally in the States, Galco's pretty decent and good-looking isometric racer. Finally, Atari did publish one Japanese game in this period. Indeed, I am pretty sure this is the last Japanese game that the company ends up publishing. And of all titles, it's Knuckle Bash. One of the last games made by Toaplan, Knuckle Bash is a strange and quite entertaining beat-em-up where a group of pro wrestlers go around beating shady rival wrestlers and gangs up in order to restore the legitimacy and supremacy of pro wrestling. You know, as you do. It's not the sort of thing that Toaplan usually made, but it's good. If you want more detail on this and the other Toaplan arcade games, I have a video all about them. The hand of Atari did not exactly turn this game into a hit, I'm afraid. So let's have a little look at business. 1994 sees things change once again. To be honest, the first half of the 1990s hasn't been awfully kind to Atari. While the arcades were very much in business, they really struggled to respond to that. As Ed Logg said with regards to Space Lords, it was a bit harder to get operators interested in big dedicated machines like that game, when the majority of highly successful arcade games were simply sold as kits. Atari didn't really have a hugely successful kit game at this time. So many of their titles do kind of depend on dedicated cabinets, the sort that really dominate the floor, but that's not really what operators are looking for, and Atari become quite cagey as a result, hence why we don't see them release any new games in 1993. The big legal battles with Nintendo over Tengen circumventing the NES's security system in order to sell games for the NES, which resolves itself in 1994 in Nintendo's favour, also doesn't help matters, and there is a bit of trouble at the top too. At some point in 1993, President Hideyuki "Hide" Nakajima falls ill and returns to Japan for treatment. Sadly, however, he passes away on July 12, 1994. Dan Van Elderen takes over as acting president for Nakajima, soon taking the top role permanently after his passing, and at this point, Atari Games have new masters. Well, sort of. In March of 1994, it's announced that Time Warner have once again acquired a controlling stake in Atari. The structure of Atari Games doesn't change all that much, with all the directors, people such as Lyle Raines and what have you, still in place, although the Tengen label for home consoles is changed, becoming consolidated under Time Warner Interactive, and Dan Van Elderen is named president of Time Warner Interactive. This umbrella includes Atari Games, although that name isn't going to change. Atari is still very much the name on the front of the cabinets for now. With all the changes that have been happening at Atari Games, it's July 1994 when we finally get a new released arcade game from them, a full 21 months after Space Lords. T-MEK is their comeback title, designed by Matthew Ford and produced by pit fighter honcho Gary Stark, and it's quite a beastly one. A whopper of a cabinet with surround sound and 2 big monitors for 2 players, one that can be easily linked up with another cab, or even 2 other cabs for a full-on 6-player battle, and a game that's all about controlling tanks in big old arena combat. By all accounts, this got a very warm reception back in 1994. With the new stewardship of Time Warner in place, it looks as though Atari are getting a bit more on the curve, seeing as this is appropriately bombastic for the time. Unfortunately, T-MEK just doesn't seem to work all that well in MAME. The graphics appear to be missing a lot, and the controls can be kind of a pain. So really, this isn't doing the game justice at all. While nothing can really do proper justice to T-MEK or its 1995 updated version T-MEK The Warlords right now, aside from playing an actual cabinet, there are at least a couple of home ports, one for PC-DOS and one for the 32X. The PC-DOS version is definitely more accurate when it comes to recreating the arcade experience, although the 32X one actually isn't half bad. While I'm not able to show this game off properly, it is generally a well-liked title that deserves a good amount of respect. It feels like it's been quite a while since Atari actually had a proper good hit in the arcades, a game that got everyone buzzing, that was actually played by a lot of people. It has been something of a slump commercially for quite a while. If we were to be brutal about it, Atari Games haven't had a big arcade hit since 1990s Pit Fighter, although I would certainly put a good word in for Rampart. Happily, the bad streak was broken in September 1994. Atari Games has a proper big hit again, and its name is Primal Rage. A project led by Dennis Harper and designed by Frank Kwan, this is what happens when Jurassic Park reaches its logical conclusion. A cataclysmic event has occurred, and the dinosaurs are well and truly back in charge, with a bunch of big dogs now fighting each other for supremacy and followers. As you win fights, your follower score increases, which I think is a cute substitute for just having a regular score. I suppose people could argue that Taito did this sort of thing first with 1992's Dino Rex, but Primal Rage is a significantly better title. The fighting is in a pretty similar vein to that of Mortal Kombat, although this is absolutely one of the better digitised fighters that followed in MK's wake, a big part of this being down to the really good looking models of the dinos. Digitised sprites tend to age a lot better when the subject isn't a human, and Primal Rage is a damn good example of that. The dinosaurs are full of personality, and they've got just the right level of animation, like some absolutely wild Ray Harryhausen type flick. I also like how you can see your followers in each stage, egging you on, despairing over your defeat, occasionally getting too close to the action and being sent flying. Another cool touch. The fighting gameplay itself is fine, nothing amazing really, but it's serviceable enough in the moves department. Like a couple of games, it can be a little squirry in MAME, which is down to a certain type of protection that Primal Rage and other titles use, and the MAME devs have never been able to quite crack that. This doesn't at all make the game unplayable, just a little buggy at points. I do kind of wonder if this protection is the cause of issues that I have with T-MEK and Riot, seeing as they also have unemulated protection. Anyway, Primal Rage is a fine game, and it was a really big smash for Atari. It's not just sales of the game itself, whether it be the arcade or various ports, but there was also a lot of Primal Rage merchandise, a whole bunch of figures, a comic and so on, and sales for those weren't too shabby either. With Time Warner now in control, we unfortunately no longer have exact figures of arcade cabs to hand, as the relevant memos simply aren't available. It is fair to say, however, that Primal Rage was one of Atari's most successful games of the decade. I imagine that if you combine the arcade sales with the ports and all the merchandise, it may even have a pretty good chance of being number one.
Rage.
Next up, in October, we have a released game that unfortunately we cannot play in MAME, and it's Cops. Generic title? Heh, of course not. This is a licensed game, tying in with the Verite-style TV documentary of the same name, Bad Boys and all that, filmed on location with the men and women of law enforcement. While usually all subjects are found innocent or guilty in a court of law, Cops is a bit more straightforward than that. This is a Laserdisc game, and it consists of driving and shooting. The driving is a road avenger type affair where you chase the criminals and follow directions, and the shooting is, well, shooting. No arrests were made during the making of this game. The perpetrators are carrying guns and aiming them at you, so make sure you fill them full of lead. If a perpetrator is not carrying a gun, then try not to fill them full of lead. Keywords there being try to. Unfortunately, I've never played this, but this feels an awful lot like a kind of cleaned up version of American Laser Games' Crime Patrol, only with a bit of driving added. Nova Productions, for they are the folks who made this for Atari, certainly did a better job of filming Cops, seeing as they didn't do it on a bloody cloudy day for a start. But, I don't know. Crime Patrol has a bit more charm than this for me, because it's so ridiculously cheesy and filled with bad acting, while this is just too bloody professional for its own good. Lousy professional filmmakers coming over here with their steadicams, risk assessments and call sheets and such bullshit. All told, it still looks like a decent enough entry into the Laserdisc canon, coming in hot as we get close to the end of the Laserdisc game's second era. I certainly wish I could play it, although at least the footage is out there. You know, out there. The place where you should be careful. At YouTube.
So get back on track.
You got that?
We've got another attempt at a 3D driving game. This one's called Metal Maniax. Unfortunately, we don't have any gameplay footage of this one in action, but apparently it's a Demolition Derby style game, and the hardware involved is absolutely monstrous. System 16 describes the board as one that features literally hundreds of chips, including 8 CPUs and DSPs. The cabinet itself is also a monster, a twin cabinet that can be linked up to another, with seats that move about. It all sounds suitably bombastic, but the game itself apparently isn't that good. Despite all the serious hardware, it runs like an absolute dog, only able to produce 25 to 30 frames at best, and occasionally going down into the single digits. And so, this didn't come out. Atari felt that the game lagged too far behind the likes of Daytona USA. It's a shame that we aren't able to see any footage of the game running, although there are a few cabinets out there. Back in 1991, Atari released Road Riot 4WD, a fairly decent off-road racing title. 3 years later, there was an attempt at a sequel that didn't come off, Road Riot's Revenge Rally. This game is listed as not working in MAME, although it is sort of playable. The only trouble is that the tracks don't actually turn, and I do imagine they're supposed to. This sequel plays similarly to the first title and has the same digitised graphics, but the main addition is weapons. You can use basic shots to slow vehicles down, missiles to blow them up, and shields to protect yourself. When you combine this with all of the stunts you can do on these quickfire courses, it makes for a wild racer, the sort where it's pretty easy to go from last to first and back again in no time at all, and it's not all that bad. But again, it just seems a bit lacking in the technical department compared to other games that are out there. It does feel like a game from a couple of years prior to 1994, and I couldn't see this competing with something like Cruising USA, in all honesty. As we get further into the 90s, we head into pretty choppy waters for Atari Games, where they're struggling to get hits and can't compete with the big boys on a technical level. While this game doesn't look terrible, it's most certainly behind the curve. We only have one Atari arcade game released in 1995. However, it is a Kim-style doozy. One of their most successful and best arcade games of the decade. It's Area 51. We have a little bit of backstory for this one that's taken from the unreleased games video, going all the way back to 1993, so we'll hit that first. Originally, Area 51 was called Bounty Hunter. There's a big article on the Arcade Heroes website about this unreleased game, with info from one of the artists, Scott Christian Sava. Essentially, Atari wanted their own gun game to compete with the likes of Lethal Enforcers, and Bounty Hunter would have had you chasing down various criminals. There'd have been a robot that's gone rogue, a witch doctor, an evil tycoon and other assorted villains, and there was some filming and capture done for these characters. The game was worked on for around about a year in this form before Sava moved on, and Ed Logg also worked on the game before he moved over to EA. The gun that he designed did eventually make it into the final game. Eventually, the Bounty Hunter project was ditched and development of this gun game was outsourced to a company named Missologic, but a lot of the elements that went into the creation of Bounty Hunter would end up forming the basis for Area 51, which eventually gets made with the help of some brand new arcade hardware, the Kojag, which is basically an arcadified version of the Atari Jaguar. Kojag is short for coin-operated Jaguar. Some may think that nothing good ever came from the Jaguar, and they would of course be wrong, especially seeing as this game exists. Also, while a game like this may previously have used a laserdisc, what with the pre-rendered backgrounds and so on, Area 51 actually uses a hard drive to store all of its video. This would be a norm for the company going forward. In the game itself, you're part of the Special Tactical Advanced Alien Response, or STAR team, and you need to clear out the infested secret base. The Quan aliens have taken over, the whole thing is way too far gone, and you need to get in there, trigger a nuclear self-destruct, and get the hell out. There are various things about this game I particularly love. Firstly, there's lots of stuff to shoot. Obviously there's the aliens that will shout and explode into plenty of gibs once they get shot, but there's also all sorts of barrels and crates to hit too, and you really should do that. You'll find plenty of power-ups and multipliers inside of them, and it's nice to keep your ammo up by shooting them and getting new guns, as opposed to always reloading. Mind you, I am the sort of person who reloads every single chance they get in games like this, so hey-ho. The look of the game appeals to me, the pre-rendered areas, and those aliens, well, they look very cool. They're certainly quite memorable, and I believe that they're a combination of regular motion capture as well as stop motion. Very nice. There's also other neat extras, being able to start later on in the game if you need a challenge fast, the occasional fun little Easter egg or reference, and the secret Quan Hunter mode that you can get into if you really fancy a tough time. If you shoot the first 3 star members you see with your first 3 bullets, which you can do without losing a credit, you become a Quan Hunter, tasked with taking out your own kind. The gameplay and the area is the same, although the colours go all corrupted and psychedelic as a way of emulating the Quan's infrared vision. It's quite cool, although your eyes may complain about it after a little while. All that, and it's just a very nostalgic game for me. I loved Area 51 when it came out, and it was a game that I'd play every time I saw it, usually for several credits. It didn't necessarily get good ratings from the critics when compared to other much more graphically impressive gun games that came out in '95, such as Sega's Virtua Cop 2 or Namco's Time Crisis. However, that didn't matter, because it was a commercial triumph. Area 51 was right there at the start of gun games becoming a huge thing in the arcades once again, and it shifted over 20,000 units, becoming Atari's biggest arcade hit in years. They may well have toiled a bit in the first half of the 90s, but Area 51 isn't just a great arcade game, it's also the start of a comeback.
Hurry up, we gotta go!
Clear the hangar. Recon shows level 5 contamination on air.
Here's Fishin Frenzy, a 1995 game from Mike Halley. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You plunge your hook into the sea and try to catch as many fishies as possible, avoiding other bigger creatures along the way such as sharks, skeletons and the dreaded sea monster. Naturally, you get more points if you get multiple fish on your hook with a single cast, and yeah, that's about it. This is quite a simple game and there's not a lot to say about it, although it's entertaining enough. It just kinda reminds me of an old screensaver more than anything else. Lord BBH says that this feels more like a Redemption SWP type game as opposed to a proper one, and I'm inclined to agree. Perhaps that would have been the case if this game had actually come out. The hardware that's run in the game is more interesting. The board for this game is called the Kojag, and it's essentially an arcade version of the Jaguar. Most of the titles made for the Kojag board didn't come out. There's one called 3-on-3 Basketball, for which we basically have nothing but a name, and another that we'll be seeing in a few entries' time. The two games that did come out on Kojag hardware were, at the least, successful ones. Area 51 and its follow-up, Maximum Force, were both released using it.
Papa combo. Nice combo.
And with that, we finished up another part. I do promise, absolutely for certain this time, that the next part is the last one. The one where we look at Atari's arcade games from 1996 to 2000, and happily, we get a lot of good stuff. The 3D world ends up being good for Atari games, and we'll be seeing the awesome likes of San Francisco Rush, Gauntlet Legends and more taking the stage, along with more unreleased titles. But alas, all good things come to an end, and that is ultimately the fate that lies in store for the studio. All of this is to come in the last part, but hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and until the next time, bye for now.